Hi, welcome to Friday. And we are now in our second week of the series. It's okay. Um, and I want to tell you that I've become the camera person, the production person, the video person. I'm all of that, and I don't get it right all the time. But I tell you what I do. I keep working at it until I can, and I do. So, but for the second week of It's Okay, we're going to talk about it's okay to be wrong. For the first week, we talked about it's okay to fail. This week, we're going to talk about it's okay to be wrong. That it's okay that we don't get it right. That it's okay that we don't dot every I. It's okay that we don't cross every T. It's okay. And we spent a lot of, last year just talking about what wasn't okay. So today, for 9 weeks, we're going to talk about what is okay. So we're going to talk about it's okay to be wrong. And to help us to talk about that, we're going to talk about a couple. And the couple's name is Abraham and Sarah. Abraham and Sarah were wrong. Unlike Peter in It's Okay to Fail, Peter, he swore that he would not deny Christ, and he swore that he would go to the death with Christ. And then when the time came, he did as Christ told him he would. He denied Christ. And so he failed that test. He did not succeed in what he had swore to the death that he would do. Unlike Sarah and Abraham, they had been made a promise and told that the promise was going to go a certain way. And so, they were trying, in their story, they wanted to help God with fulfilling God's promise to them. But let's talk about the definition of wrong before we go into the story of Abraham and Sarah. See, the definition for wrong is speaking, acting, or judging in a way that does not agree with the facts or the truth. Say it again. Speaking, acting, or judging in a way that does not agree with the facts or the truth. And so this is what Sarah and Abraham were guilty of. They were guilty of being wrong. Not acting, speaking, or judging in a way which was in agreement with what God had instructed and told them was to be true and what was to be factual. And so let's kind of talk about the story. Abraham and Sarah had been promised by God that they would conceive a son, and that son would be the birth of a nation, the nation of Israel. And they were getting up in age, and they thought that they were way past the point of conception, that it was not going to happen. They began to think that it wasn't going to happen. So they what they did was they implemented a plan to help God fulfill God's promise to them. But what they didn't understand was the promise was also to God first. And so Sarah came up with the idea that she would give her bondwoman, her Egyptian slave, Hagar, to Abraham to bed and to birth the child. And that the child would be like Sarah's and Abraham's, and that would be the fulfillment of God's promise. They were going to fulfill God's promise. They didn't need to fulfill God's promise. God had promised them, and God had promised them that the son was going to be born by Abraham and Sarah. So now Sarah gives Hagar to Abraham, and Abraham and Hagar conceives a son, and his name is Ishmael. But Ishmael is still not the promise. God still comes to them and says, I'm going to birth a son through Sarah for you, Abraham. I don't care how old you are. And they did like most of us. When we start to feel like our biological clock is ticking and time is running out, we begin to think that we need to implement a plan that's going to help God fulfill his promise. And so they did. And then Sarah turned around and then had Isaac, as God had promised her, at the age of 90, and Abraham was 100. But God opened her womb, divinely opened her womb, and they were able to conceive. And God fulfilled his promise, which he was going to do all along. So Sarah and Abraham were wrong because they did not act, judge, or speak in agreement with the facts and the truth that God has given them. And so, we too have to be careful of that, not to help God implement God's promise to himself and to us. So now we have both sons in the land. And so now we come to our scripture. And our scripture is Genesis chapter 12, verses 8 through 13. It says, the child grew and was weaned. And on the day Isaac was weaned, Abraham held a great feast. But Sarah saw that the son whom Hagar, the Egyptian, had borne to Abraham was mocking. And she said to Abraham, get rid of that slave woman and her son, for that woman's son will never share in the inheritance with my son Isaac. The matter distressed Abraham greatly because it concerned his son. But God said to him, do not be so distressed about the boy and your slave woman. Listen to whatever Sarah tells you, because it is through Isaac that your offspring will be reckoned. I will make the son of the slave into a nation also, because he is your offspring. So, Abraham and Sarah were wrong to try to help God fulfill the promise. And now the sons were in the land, and there was a bond son and there was a free son. And the bonded son could not abide with the free son. So because of their wrong, God corrected and made it right. So that's what I want to tell you. It's okay if we're wrong. God can make it right. And so what God did turn around and said to Abraham, he said, listen, you listened to your wife when you took her slave. Now you got to listen to your wife to send her slave away. But what I'm going to do, because you've asked me, and so when we are wrong, when we have made a wrong decision or wrong choice, we can pray to God and ask God to fix it, to make it right. And so that's what Abraham did. And God said, you know what, Abraham, because I'm going to keep my promise to me and to you, I'm going to take what you have done wrong and I'm going to make it right. I am going to bless your bond son. I'm going to bless Hagar and Ishmael. But they got to go. But I'm going to make a nation out of them. I'm going to fulfill my promise to you, and I'm going to take care of the residue of your wrong, the fallout of your wrong. I'm going to keep it, because quiet as this kept, Ishmael and Hagar were innocent because Hagar was a slave. She had to do as her master instructed her. And Ishmael was just a child born. So, God will take care of everything. It's okay if we're wrong. It's okay if we make a mistake. You get what I'm saying? If God has instructed us on something and we don't do it exactly as God has instructed us, then we're going to make a mistake. See, Hagar could not give birth to the promise. God said the promise had to come from Sarah and Abraham. And God was going to keep his promise to himself. So, God wanted me to tell you today, it's okay if you're wrong. But when you realize that you're wrong, come back, pray to God, listen to God's instructions, and do as God has instructed, and God will take care of any residue and fallout from your mistake. That's what God wanted me to tell you today. So it's okay to be wrong. Sarah and Abraham was wrong, and look at them. We've been living off their story for generations and generations and generations. Because God kept his promise to himself. He fulfilled the promise to make Abraham and Sarah's son, Isaac, to birth a nation. Much love, Keita.